part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole. And this episode, we have a very special guest joining us. This is my friend, Alexis Williams, who recently graduated from law school. And she's here today to provide a little bit of legal knowledge on the film that we're discussing. So, Alexis, do you want to tell our listeners a bit about your background?
Sure. So I, like you said, am a recent law school graduate. I graduated from Elon University School of Law, where I also went for undergrad. That's where I met Nicole. I spent the last year, the latter half of my law school career, working in an immigration firm. My primary legal background is actually working with immigration for specifically refugees and asylees. And that's not necessarily what I meant to get into with law school, but I've come to really feel very passionate about it. And I think from my experiences from that, I'm now finding myself wanting to go into more like civil rights type of law. But prior to that, I was living and working in New York City for a little bit, working for the Broadway League, because I've always been a huge fan of musicals.
we all know you're going to do amazing work with
Wherever you end up.
Thank you.
Yeah, seriously.
Thank you.
You're passionate and good at what you do.
Thank
Once
you.
we're out of quarantine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if that ever happens, like, living in my parents' house right out of school was not on my to-do list, but lo and behold, I may be here forever, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Doing law from your bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So, since you have been trapped in quarantine, I am sure you've been watching a lot of movies. So, since this is a podcast about historical movies, what is your favorite historical movie, Alexis?
Okay, so I've thought about this. I think, I almost don't want to say this, but I think my favorite is Titanic. And
There's no shame
It's
in
a
that. That's a good one.
masterpiece.
the thing with
It is a
Titanic, though,
masterpiece.
is that I have such a love-hate relationship with it. Because, like, on the one hand, I think it's so aesthetically pleasing, and I think it's very, like, from a cinematic standpoint, so impressive. But so many of the characters in that movie annoy me so much that sometimes I'm watching it and I'm like, why do I love this movie?
I love Billy Zane in that movie.
See,
So much.
I
love him in general.
I've come to love Billy Zane in that movie for the reason that I initially didn't like Billy Zane in that movie, because I realized it's not, the reason I don't like his character is not really his fault. It's James Cameron's, because, like, he's so, like, it's like a caricature of a sexist.
Mhm.
Like, the man, like, couldn't, like, this, it's just, that's his big character arc, is that he's a sexist. That's all he's got going on.
It's his only personality trait.
That is one personality trait. He has no redeeming qualities. But then I realized, like, Billy Zane sells it. Like, I think it could have been
He
very
does.
easy for someone to take that role and just be like, oh, you want the lamb, right, sweet pea? But, like, he sells it to where, like, it's almost charming, despite the fact that he's so sexist.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, Billy Zane does really well at selling really bad roles, because I don't know if you guys ever watched Charmed, but he's on, like, the later seasons of that. And his character is so ridiculous, but he is so good.
And power to him. That is a skill.
It is. So,
All right. And so we also, Maggie and I have a lot of unpopular period drama opinions. I feel
yes.
like I definitely do. I feel like Maggie has some too. So we wanted to ask you, what do you think is your most unpopular period drama opinion?
So I'm like, I started sweating a little bit when you were asking that question. I think
Ooh, this one's juicy.
my most unpopular period drama opinion is that I get almost violent at how much I don't like war movies.
Oh no.
And specifically,
Here it is.
my least favorite war movie of all time is War
Oh,
Horse.
no.
Because I hate war movies. Like, I tried to watch 1917 the other night and I couldn't do it. I'm so sorry. I don't like war movies, and I don't like horse movies. So Warhorse, by
I
its
have just had to take my
definition,
glasses off and just like sit them aside.
by its definition, Warhorse is everything I hate in a movie.
Listeners, I've come to terms with this.
And I'm so sorry. I wanted to like it because it's got Tom Hiddleston, Benedict Cumberbatch. I hear the play's great, but I was like, this is literally every war and horse movie I've ever seen in my life.
I will say,
folks, that's the end of this podcast.
Yeah.
So
I will
sorry.
say I do think that the play is much better than the movie, and I've seen the play, and I've also seen like the filmed version of it a couple of times through NT Live, and it has ruined the movie for me a little bit because the play is so superior. I really, if I had known Lexi, I really should have worn my Warhorse shirt for this episode, but I can respect it, and I do get that like war movies are not everyone's thing. My mother also does not like war movies, although she has said she's going to watch 1917 for my sake, so that's true proof of a mother's love. But I feel like there are other people in like the period drama community who don't like war films.
Oh, definitely. I mean, everybody has their thing they like.
Yeah, and I definitely prefer like kind of 20th century historical event movies. Like another one of my favorite historical movies is Apollo 13. Love that movie. It's just with a war movie, like obviously I don't want to undermine the fact that they take place during a real war where, real people died, but I just kind of feel like to an extent, if it doesn't matter which war it is, if you've seen one, you've seen them all.
Just shaking my head. Listeners, I am shaking my head.
I'm so sorry. When I was in
it is okay.
10th grade, I think, I took a class on the Civil War, and which was weird as it was, but our teacher made us watch Glory with Matthew Broderick.
Oh, I love that movie.
I wanted to walk out of class. I was like, no.
I don't blame you. It's not a great one.
Yeah, that wasn't even a well done war. Like I can appreciate when a war movie is well done, but that wasn't even a well done one.
No.
I think that one is just so weird to me because I so closely still associate Matthew Broderick with The Lion King.
Yeah.
See, I picture him as Harold Hill.
Or Ferris Bueller. I mean,
yep. It's hard to take him seriously in a war movie.
Right.
I've never seen Ferris Bueller, so can't relate.
I actually haven't either, and I've tried to watch it twice and switched to something else. Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
All right. So
well, have you watched any movies you actually enjoyed recently?
I have. Believe it or not, I do generally like movies. Despite the fact that I talked about a bunch I don't like. What I watched? Oh, so I watched The Rescuers Down Under for the first time the other night. And
I just wrote about that in an article.
Your article is partially what inspired it.
Excellent.
The original,
I'll have to let my editor know.
Yeah. The original Rescuers is one of my favorites, so I realized it was kind of weird that I haven't seen Rescuers Down Under. So I watched that. I watched oh Lord, I watched a movie today. What did I watch today?
Quarantine life right there.
Seriously. All the days blur together. Really most of my time has been spent watching TV lately because I just had no time for TV when I was in law school. But I've watched Little Women I think 3 times over the course of this quarantine.
Excellent.
I love that.
Very good.
So
Stan.
We do stan.
Yes.
So
Very
I feel like that's actually a good transition because the next thing that we like to talk about is what we're watching on TV right now. So I'll let you start, Alexis.
So I just binge watched Schitt's Creek in its entirety. I started it my 1L year of school. Like a friend had recommended it to me, and I thought it was one of the funniest shows I'd ever seen. And then just with school, like you have no time for anything. So I kind of fell behind, and then I got caught up and then fell behind again. So the last season premiered while I was studying for the bar. And so I just decided like, I'm not going to watch it. I'm going to wait. And then binge the entire series at once. And I knocked it out in I think like 3 days. And I'm still almost in like a state of mourning that like I'm never going to get another new episode of Schitt's Creek. I love that show. And I started Atypical on Netflix.
I love Atypical.
It's I like it a lot more than I was expecting to. I'd heard mixed things, but I think it's cute and very endearing. And then I also have been watching the Taylor Swift documentary a couple times, I will not lie.
I love that documentary, but I can't watch it very often because it makes me cry buckets.
Same.
See,
I've watched it twice.
I, for whatever reason, like find it so nice to have as like ambiance while I'm folding laundry or dealing with existential dread. Just like have it on in the background.
I love those two like very quarantine activities right there.
It's about all you can do, really.
Really?
It's true.
So,
Well,
Maggie,
I have been
what
watching.
if...
Yes.
I was just going to say, Maggie, what have you been watching?
I have been watching Narcos Mexico, which is historical because it was set in 1980. I finished binging Narcos, which I think I talked about in our first episode, and I've moved on to Mexico. And I have been playing a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2, so I've been living in 1898 every night. Which, if you're a gamer and you also like history, that video game is amazing. The online community is like, I mean, about what you expect for a video game online community, but like you can meet some really cool people on there. And on Wednesday, April 22nd, I will be watching myself on TV in True Terror with Robert England over on the Travel Channel. So be sure to check your local listing and pray that they don't use the takes where they had me using a really bad New York accent. Because I was not good. But it's set in Philadelphia and like, I think it was like around the turn of the century. So like cool historical costumes. I had to wear a corset all day. Super fun to film. And also Robert England. I mean, hello.
That's so exciting.
That
I
is.
know.
Oh, so impressive.
Thanks.
Okay, and I feel like I said, might have been on the first episode, that I was trying to decide between what I was going to watch, if I was going to go for The Crown Season 3 or Beecham House, and I had a lovely listener tell me not to bother with Beecham House. So I watched all of Season 3 of The Crown. I say all of Season 3, it's 10 episodes, but for me, who like never watches TV, it was a lot of TV to get through. And I absolutely loved it. I love Helena Bonham Carter, and I especially love seeing her in serious roles because she's so great in like fun and kooky roles. But I think people forget that she's a really good dramatic actress.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was so great to see her in a role like that. And obviously for her to have like gotten awards and nominations all throughout the last season. And I also loved seeing Josh O'Connor as Prince Charles, because obviously we did an episode on Emma. You all know I'm a big fan of that movie. So to get to see him in a role so different from Mr. Elton was very exciting.
And he's such a good Prince Charles.
Oh, he's so perfect. It's honestly, I think that show overall has really great casting, but I think his is one of the best pieces of casting on the whole thing. And other than that, I've mostly just been playing a lot of Oregon Trail.
You sure have.
So much.
So poor Alexis has, I basically send her screenshots every time something happens to me on the Oregon Trail, because she's the one who got me into it, because I actually never played it like as a kid. I wasn't much of a video game person at all, but I'd heard of it, and then I was prepping because on Alexis's recommendation, I'm starting to watch some Star Kid musicals, and she said that maybe I should, take a look at it, play it, to prep to watch the Star Kid show Trail to Oregon. And in true Nicole fashion, I've gone overboard, and now I'm addicted to playing Oregon Trail, and...
Only about, 20 years late?
I think it came at the right time, though. It came at the right time as I'm in quarantine, and I get to pretend that I'm out amongst people in the fresh air.
That's true.
I'm just a little bitter that you killed me the other day.
I didn't do it on purpose.
You drowned the entire party. I'm very suspicious.
Honestly, she deserves some sort of award for how many times she tips over the wagon when she floats down the river. I've never seen someone tip the wagon that many times. It seems like she does it every time. And every time I drown.
Okay,
or break an arm.
Theory. Conspiracy theory time. She's trying to drown the entire party so that she gets all the fame and glory for making it to Oregon.
Okay, but here's the thing. Whenever I drown the whole party, I refresh and I start a new game because I can't bear to go on by myself.
That is not true. That is not true. You died of typhoid fever.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the one time I did keep going, but now I just always start over.
Yeah, last night she texted me and she went, "Oh no, my husband and my child and you died. I'm starting over. I can't do it."
But the thing is that's really weird about it is that I always, either I drown the whole party or I make it to Oregon. Like, there's no in between for me. I never just, like, everyone gets picked off by something different. And I don't know why. It feels like a weird skill, honestly. So if anyone knows what's up with that, please get in contact.
If you have any Oregon Trail cheat codes, feel free to send them our way. And by our way, I really mean Nicole's way.
Yes. I love roasting Nicole. It's like my favorite pastime.
Sometimes she even does it on the Petticoats and Poppies account, so keep an eye out for that one, folks.
Uh-huh. Don't worry, I'm already looking for a nice Oregon Trail gift.
I love what I've created.
This is all Alexis's fault, but
it's true.
I feel like then we should transition into talking about why we brought her here. That sounds terrible. I make it sound like we're gonna like sacrifice her to something.
I bet you're wondering why we brought you here today, Alexis.
To talk about law.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So we decided to discuss the film Loving, which Alexis had recommended to us, and I had never seen it. Maggie, had you seen it before?
I have shamefully never seen it before this week.
Which is, I feel like it's kind of crazy that neither of us had seen this, particularly you, because it's set and filmed in Virginia, which I'm sure you'll talk about later.
Yes.
But if anyone, doesn't know, the film is about the couple behind the 1967 Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia, and it has Joel Edgerton and Ruth Negga as Richard and Mildred Loving, and it took inspiration from the 2011 documentary The Loving Story, and it was written and directed by Jeff Nichols. And it got some Oscar nominations, some Golden Globe nominations. I also did find it was edited by Julie Monroe, and I always love to recognize when there's a female editor of a film, because that's, obviously we talk a lot about female directors and female writers, but editing is another, I think, aspect of film that women have had a hard time breaking into.
It's true. Yes.
Very much a boys' club. So I thought we would just start, as we always do, by giving some of our overall reactions to the movie. So Maggie, do you want to start?
Yes. So I think I texted you about how much I loved watching this film and seeing that it had a director who let the scenes breathe. Especially in a lot of modern films, there's so much like fast-paced, hard cuts, 52 camera angles, like so many things that make a scene overcomplicated. And this movie really utilized like one or two shots. They would do an establishing shot and then a close-up and then pull back. And it was just perfect, like moments, especially because this is such an intimate story about these two individuals and the plight that they were experiencing. I felt like the moments were really given a chance to breathe. The actors, were able to deliver their lines. And because, especially with Richard, he's such a silent individual, so much of his interactions with Mildred had to be through body language and facial expressions. And just the way this film was created really allowed the power of the moments to play out and not rely heavily on fast-paced editing or, fancy cinematic, scene setups. It was really refreshing. I don't see that as often in films as I would like to see.
Definitely. I feel like it would have been really easy to take this court case and make like a courtroom drama about it, but I love that the film is much more focused just on the couple and on their everyday lives and on the love between them, and the court cases feel secondary to just the story of them together. And I think that that's part of what makes it so compelling to watch. And it's so well acted. Like, Edgerton is barely recognizable. I feel like I've seen him in a lot of movies recently, and every time he looks very different, but I think this is the most different. If I didn't know it was him, I don't know that I would have like automatically been like, oh, hey, there's Joel, you know, like, not that that's how I think anyway. What? But I think it's like a deliciously quiet movie to be about something so momentous. And like there's that bit at the end where they're cutting between the Supreme Court hearing and Richard and Mildred just going about their life. And it's so powerful.
And you know, I think the way they edited that worked so well because it really is just two people who are just trying to live their lives.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be like this couple that was the face of a huge court case. They just wanted to be married and have their marriage be recognized and to have their children be legitimized by it. Like that's, I think the way they filmed that really nailed home that message.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I like the what I like most about this movie, which I'd actually seen it for the first time before I went to law school. And I hadn't seen it since. And what I found so compelling about this movie the second go around was that, and this is a nichely specific thing I know, but you know, I've read, I don't even know how many court cases over the last 3 years. And, you know, you always get, when you read it, especially, you know, like something like this case, you read it in a law textbook and it's like, here are the facts. Richard and Mildred Loving were an interracial couple in Virginia. They wanted to be married, but there was a law that said they couldn't. It was so, I don't want to say sobering, that's not the right word, but it hit differently, like seeing this couple play out their lives. And it's one of those moments where you're like, oh, these aren't just, you know, not just with this case, but with any case, it's like this isn't just facts on a page. And I think in the law field or legal field, it's so easy to get so caught up in the facts and what did the law say and how does that transit to Supreme Court. And it's just, it kind of reminded me what is great about the law or the legal profession is that you're allowed to look into that and actually apply it to real people. Like these are real people who have real issues and need help.
And that these laws have, you know, real recourse
and real consequences.
People
yeah.
Just trying to live.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, this film was, I think, fairly historically accurate as well in terms of how they portrayed the Lovings, the people around them, the community, which was really nice to see because so often movies that are made based on true stories or inspired by true stories take a lot of liberties. But this one felt very true, not only to the story, but also to the documentary. And just, you know, I think a lot of that came from the fact that, you know, Peggy Loving, their daughter, was involved with production and visited the set and tried to keep it, you know, on track.
Absolutely. And she said about it that she was very impressed with how well the actors really embodied her parents. And if you look at actual photos of the couple and then you look at the movie, it is kind of remarkable how well they did that. And, you know, Edgerton and Ruth Negga were very dedicated to trying to recreate the couple's look and sound and character just as truly as possible. And obviously with any period drama, you've got some characters, some scenes that are invented, things that are condensed, things that are, you know, I'm sure there's some people who are meant to represent maybe a wider group of people. But it does really say that, it does really seem that it's a kind of wildly historically accurate movie.
I mean, they even use the Bowling Green Historic Jail Complex, which was the actual jail that the Lovings were held in, which I used to work at a historic jail myself. So I've visited that historic jail many times. And I just absolutely loved like sitting there watching the movie and being like, oh my gosh, they actually used the Bowling Green jail. And that was just, you know, I think that's one of the perks with filming in and around a location that you're basing your movie on. It really helps lend to the authenticity of the story.
Absolutely. And I will say, in trying to do some research, I found a few things that maybe were off. Like, I thought it was interesting. Phil Hirschkopf, I think is his name, one of the lawyers involved, said that he was portrayed as too mild-mannered in the film. But he said that, you know, the film still serves its purpose, that it didn't detract from it. He just thought it was interesting to see himself portrayed on screen maybe as a bit nicer than he actually is. And the only other thing I found really is that Ruth Negga is of Irish and Ethiopian heritage. But Mildred Loving, and this is an interesting thing, there is some debate about what her ethnicity actually was, but it seems like probably African American and American Indian. I believe she said that her family was of the Rappahannock Indian tribe. But there has been some debate on what actually her ethnicity was, so you can't really blame him for that. And I think that, you know, it was a perfect choice of actress, and she was even nominated for the Oscars, so I think that's kind of hard to...
And she was phenomenal. I mean, just the way that she portrayed so much emotion, and, you know, I really love the dynamic between her and Joel's portrayal of Rich, and just, there's so many funny scenes where, it's not meant to be funny, but it was funny in the way that he would get all like grumpy and not into this whole legal case thing. And then, you know, everything would look to her and she would just be like, we'll be contacting you. You know, it's just very how she was like, we're doing this. Which I didn't even put this in the show notes, but Nick Kroll as a serious role is like, as soon as he appeared on screen, I was just like, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, as soon as he appeared, I texted Lexi and I was like, Nick Kroll is in this?
To which I responded, that's why I watched it the first time, honestly. I'm a huge Nick Kroll fan, and I did watch this because I heard that he was in it, and I was like, Nick Kroll in a serious role? That's a thing? And
I couldn't believe it.
I thought he did a very good job. I think, you know, I think he had that right balance where he didn't... I think it could have been very easy for someone in his position to play it as the hero of the story. Like, oh, I'm the one who took it to the Supreme Court, and I'm the one who got the Supreme Court to rule this. Like, and his performance was just understated enough. But, like, I also could see, again, it was something that I appreciated more the second time, of that you can tell, like, that twinge in his eye, like, oh, I'm going to Supreme Court. I am going to go argue for the Supreme Court. And any lawyer would be, you know, excited for that. But I think I was... It's odd how impressed I was by his performance, given that he's a secondary character. But I just really was not expecting to see him pull that off quite so well.
Neither was I. I think I texted Nicole and I was like, wait, Nick in a serious role? This can't be possible. Because I still can't believe how well he handled that. I mean, it was very good. And, you know, I thought the whole movie as a whole, you know, Michael Shannon's and all these like very big names that were secondary characters really added to it somehow. I don't really know if I have the right words to express that, but I thought it was nice to see so many familiar faces playing secondary roles rather than, you know, the main characters or the people really involved in the story.
And I think part of the reason that is because, and it goes back to what we were saying, but the thing this movie gets so right is the fact that it's not focusing on anything else but the love story going on. It's not, you know, I would hardly even classify this as necessarily a legal film. This, I mean, it's about like one of the most landmark cases in our nation's history, but, you know, it felt to me like I was watching this dramatic romance movie. And then, you know, ACLU is involved in the Supreme Court. But it's just, I was so invested in this couple. And I think like my favorite scene in the whole movie is when Nick Kroll comes over one last time before he goes to Washington, and he tells Richard, like, oh, is there anything you wanted me to say to the Supreme Court? And he goes, yeah, you tell the judge that I love my wife. I think that sums up the point of this movie better than anything, of like, this is just about a basic human right of being with somebody that you love. Like, this isn't necessarily about the legal implications, even though I think that it definitely opens up conversation for legal implications. But just that scene, I thought, was one of the most poignant, gosh, I can never say that word, powerful scenes I've seen in a historical film. And I remember the first time I saw this movie, like, that scene gave me chills.
Well, you just gave me chills talking about that scene, so.
I think that's easily one of the most beautiful parts of the whole film.
I agree.
But speaking of beautiful, Maggie, you're our resident costume design person.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a bit about these incredible ensembles. I mean, obviously it's a film with kind of understated costume design, but every time there was a new outfit on Mildred, I was thrilled.
Yes. And I love the way I found a couple interviews and articles with the costume designer, Erin Bennick, about some of their choices they made. A lot of her clothes were actually vintage pieces. Luckily, this was set in the 1950s, and there is a plethora of 50s and 60s clothing that works. So they were able to get a lot of vintage pieces. But they also really they made a point of, at the beginning, when she is in the country and she's feeling free, her clothing is, carefree, flowing, very comfortable 50s dresses. But then when they have that transition of, getting sent out of Virginia and living in the city, her clothing style changes. And then she starts wearing much more structured pencil skirts and sweaters to kind of symbolize this isolated feeling she was experiencing while she was living in DC, which I thought was such a great example of really doing the work to make the audience subtly pick up on things, which really works in a film that is so reliant on visuals, because there is so many moments where it's just relying on how Mildred was feeling and how Rich was reacting. And so the clothing really builds the scene. And so it was really nice to see how the costume designer build the pieces. And I really love the scene when they are in the market and she's buying her patterns. I thought that was such a nice touch, especially since so many of the pieces she was wearing, if you look really close, you can see a lot of like hand stitches that they made sure were visible. So it's like very clear that she's making her own clothes. And I thought it was a really nice touch how they built both of their costumes. I also read that a lot of Rich's clothes, the clothes they made for Joel, they actually not handmade, but custom made all of his pieces, because there was something wrong with the way that, I guess there's some style of pants that like bricklayers wore, and it was really hard to find pairs that existed that would fit Joel. So they had to custom make all of his clothes to match pictures they had of Richard.
Oh, that's fascinating. I love that they, went to the trouble of doing that.
Mm-hmm. And they tried to replicate a lot of their, they had a lot of pictures from the family and a lot of the pictures that were like in the People magazine articles. And so they had a lot of pictures of the Lovings to draw from and tried to exactly replicate. I think the plaid shirt that he wears in the scene where the photographer's there taking pictures of them on the sofa, which is replicating the actual photos, they actually handmade that shirt, so that was exactly the shirt that was in the picture.
Oh wow,
I love that.
They were dedicated, and I think that's what gives it so much realism, is that they really worked to stay true to the story.
Mm-hmm. I do think
that's lovely.
I one thing I appreciated about like the costumes and kind of production design, like overall aesthetic of this movie, is that I feel like a lot of times in movies, be they just fiction or historical, if a movie's set in like the 40s and to I'd say maybe 70s, like I feel like costume designers tend to go a little over the top and take just like the very like most stereotypical thing we think of in that time period and just oversaturate it. Whereas this felt just very authentic in not just the way they, got some of those costumes down straight to what the actual Lovings wore, but just I can see how a lot of those costumes were actually like genuinely vintage pieces. And I understand that like not all movies can do that, but I prefer when movies go ahead and just use vintage pieces instead of trying to just like recreate these recreate looks, because it just almost takes me out of it when I'm watching a movie set in a time period and like all I can focus on is just how like pristine and modern looking these like 50s and 60s costumes look.
And I noticed a lot of the clothing had like wear spots on it, and it was very lived in. And that's, like you said, like it really helps make a movie better.
It almost feels like, looking at their clothes in the movie, like if you have old family photographs from this era, which like I know I've seen a lot of my family, and it looks like that. It doesn't feel that far off of what we wear now, particularly what, maybe older relatives wear who are kind of clinging to those styles more. It just feels more like actual real clothes that people would be wearing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I love all the different outfits that Mildred wears while she's pregnant. I thought it was so interesting to kind of get this depiction of what, I guess maternity clothes, I guess, looked like in that time, because I feel like that's something that you don't often get to see in films.
And usually when it's done in films, they overdo it. They, they put them in really tight clothes that show off the baby bump. And it's like, nobody did that back then.
Yeah.
You wore loose fitting, comfortable clothes because you didn't have air conditioning.
Right.
And, I don't know, this film just really, really knocked it out of the park with their entire production design. And I really think it comes back to the fact that they used so many locations that were in and around where this story actually happened. Part of the production design is, the locations and the use of the Bowling Green jail. That, especially, I don't know, I feel like as somebody who lives in Virginia, who is like intimately familiar with this production because so many of my friends were in this, it was so strange to see like friends of mine in the background and friends of mine walking in the prison. And I was just like, oh, I know all of these people. And I know all of the locations, and, a lot of the locations, we're in Harriet. So if you've seen Harriet, you might recognize a few of the locations. The street where the cops are sitting, it's like a dirt lane that they use that was like supposed to be leading up to where Mildred and Rich were the first time they get arrested. That's the same lane that's used. Joe Alwyn's character rides down a lane in Harriet. That's that same road. If you watch The Walking Dead World Beyond that comes out later this year, a lot of the same locations are used in that. So there's just a lot of locations that are like iconic Virginia locations that were used in this film, which was really fun to see.
That's cool that you're able to like pick up on and recognize that.
It's so nice. And it made me so nostalgic because I really miss my film friends. And Corona has taken my job away from me. So it was really fun. And like, I really enjoyed being able to like support, Virginia film by finally watching this movie.
Nice.
Yeah. It again, I feel like it's crazy that neither of us had seen this before now.
It's insane. Like, I have so many friends in this film, and I was just like, how did I never watch this?
Yeah, while you were watching it, I felt like you just kept being like, wait, I know this person. Wait, this person.
It was so weird.
I feel like, which I know this is, like a lower budget independent film, but I feel like I did not know this movie existed until after it had come out. Like I
agree. Focus definitely did not give it the attention it deserved.
Like I hadn't even heard of it until when I was living in New York. I saw the Colbert Show and Nick Kroll was there and he brought it up and I was like, what? And I looked it up, and then when I was in school, I remember my professor, we get to this case and my professor was like, Loving versus Virginia. He's like, I think they made a movie about it. And there was just this awkward silence and I went, they did, it's good, you should watch it.
I love that.
Which, that is the perfect segue into talking about the legalities of the Loving v. Virginia case.
Yeah. So one thing I did like about this movie is that it didn't focus on the legalities. But at the same time, I think that the legalities of this case are very interesting and still relevant today. So obviously, like, I'm not gonna get into the facts of the case because we know we saw the movie. But basically, what the Supreme Court had to decide was Virginia's law a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And when a constitutional right is called into question, or if a law exists and someone challenges the constitutionality of it, what the court will do is that it will first decide whether or not what is being challenged is a classification or a classification for what is covered by the Equal Protection Clause. Basically, that breaks into race, gender, illegitimate children is actually a classification, alienage, the right to vote, the right to travel, national origin, and each of those classifications are broken into different levels of scrutiny that the court will look into when deciding whether or not that law violates that constitutional right. So race is a strict scrutiny classification, meaning that that is the top level of scrutiny that the court will use. There's also intermediate and rational basis. So under strict scrutiny suspect classification, what the court will do is that it will look at the law and determine whether or not the law is necessary to a, quoting the court's words, compelling state interest, if the law is narrowly tailored to achieving that compelling purpose, and that the law uses the least restrictive means to achieve the purpose. So basically what that means is that if someone brings forth a law and they say this law is discriminatory on the basis of race, the court will look at it and think, what is basically the intent here that the law had. Sometimes there are cases where, you bring forth a law and there's discriminatory effect, but that wasn't the intent of the law. And so that's, handled differently than a law like this one, where the basic intent is to be racist, which is essentially what the court said. And so in this case, the court determined, gosh, I feel like I'm back in law school, like recapping a case, like I've just been cold called. But basically what the court said in this case was that there was no legitimate purpose independent of racial discrimination in creating this law. Because, it's, how else can you interpret a law like this and not see the point is to be blatantly racist? There's no promotion of welfare or, any kind of purpose that would rationalize or justify a law like this. And so, what I found kind of interesting, like reading this, is that I think that there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn, I think, in this case, and in a lot of recent cases we've seen recently with like the Equality Act and the legalizing of gay marriage. I feel like the kind of rationale and basis in this case is very similar to the cases in more recent history.
Absolutely. And I think that was something that also struck me whenever I was watching it, is that it feels like this case has had such a far-reaching impact because of all the different ways that you could talk about, discrimination in marriage.
Mm-hmm. And this was a case that one of the cases where there are certain rights that aren't explicitly spelled out in the Constitution, but are implied under the Equal Protection Clause. And this was a case where Chief Justice Warren had said that under the Constitution, the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides within the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. And I find that very striking, because I think the whole point is that with something like marriage, that's vested in an individual. That's not vested in the government, the state or federal. Not to get too political, but I just found, and I thought this the first time I watched it, and now having a better legal background than I did when I first watched it, I just couldn't help but draw parallels.
They're definitely there. 100%.
So yeah, that's your little law lesson of the day.
Oh my God,
Thank
I love
you.
it. Yay.
We always enjoy having you get to be our first, specialist on our show. So,
that's so exciting.
I really so we're going to try about, sorry, I think I lagged there for a second. I would say I do love talking about the law when I know what I'm talking about. But I won't lie, that really did take me back into and I found myself getting a little flustered and nervous.
You did wonderful.
Thank you.
So we're gonna try something a bit new. Because we have a guest, I decided that instead of just lecturing all of you listeners about like interracial marriage and the law before this case, to put together a quiz. I thought that would make it a bit more fun, and I'm gonna make Maggie and Alexis take this quiz now, and you guys can also like follow along and see what you know or what you can guess. And so I have 7 questions. 6 of them have multiple choice answers. So do you guys want to just like come up with like a noise that you'll make if you think you know the answer? Or do you want to both give me an answer and then we'll give you points for?
Let us both pick.
Yeah.
And then
All right.
And also just like full disclosure, I have test anxiety, so like I feel like I'm back in college now. Thank you, Nicole.
You're so welcome. But remember, if you do well, you literally get nothing, and if you do badly, there are no consequences. So
we are playing for pride, not prize.
Exactly. But I'll keep score just so that you guys know. I feel like you're probably pretty well matched in this. So the first one is, which of the following states never had anti-miscegenation, which is laws against interracial marriage? A, North Carolina, B, Arkansas, C, California, or D, Minnesota? Tell me if you need me to repeat the choices.
This is either like really obvious.
Yeah. Like, part of me thinks that it's like plot twist Minnesota.
That's what I was gonna say.
I think I'm gonna go with Minnesota.
I'm gonna go with Minnesota too.
You're both correct. I'm so proud of you. It is Minnesota. So there are actually 9 states that never had anti-miscegenation laws, and those states are Alaska, Connecticut, Hawaii, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, and Wisconsin. Right, which I thought was interesting. That's, you know, some states, and it makes sense with something like Hawaii or Alaska that maybe that just never came up there. But I really thought it was interesting that like New Jersey, New York, Vermont, these states that have, you know, kind of been in the US for so long, just never ended up making these laws. And obviously I'm sure that there were still, you know, there were
issues.
Yeah, and there was social custom and whatever, but I was very surprised to find out that there were some states that had never had laws like this. So to jump forward, according to some of the research that I looked at, and I've seen a couple of different numbers, but this looked like the right one. What percentage of marriages in 2010 were between a mixed race couple? Is it A, 5, B, 15, C, 20, D, 30%?
Can you ask the question again?
Yep. So what percentage of marriages in 2010 were between a mixed race couple? So people of 2 different races. 5, 15, 20, or 30.
I'm going to go with 5.
I'm going to go with 20.
You're both wrong. Ironically, it's the one in between the 2 of you. So it was 15%, and that was actually a record high, which I thought was really interesting. But it does look like it is on it's consistently climbing from what I saw over the past couple of decades. So I thought that was very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are being impacted by this court case because they're allowed to get married. So your third question, which state was the first to repeal its anti-miscegenation law? A, Illinois, B, Kansas, C, Pennsylvania, or D, Rhode Island?
I really don't know, but my gut is just saying Illinois.
All right, we've got one for Illinois. Maggie?
I'm trying to rack my brain. What were the options again?
A, Illinois, B, Kansas, C, Pennsylvania, or D, Rhode Island?
I'll go with A.
All right, you both went in for Illinois?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're both wrong.
Oh.
It's Pennsylvania.
I almost went with Pennsylvania.
What is fascinating is that Pennsylvania actually repealed its anti-miscegenation law in 1780. It was part of a bill that set up the gradual end of slavery in the state. And if you really think about it, like once you know it, it makes sense because Pennsylvania
was it the Quakers?
Had a lot of Quakers, and the Quakers were the earliest abolitionists. Massachusetts was the next state to repeal its law, but that didn't happen until 1843. So Pennsylvania was very much ahead of the curve. So kind of moving on in history, 30 states still had anti-miscegenation laws by the end of World War II. How many states do you think repealed these laws between 1948 in 1967 when this case happened? So remember, you're going out of 30. Was it A, 3, B, 14, C, 25, or D, 10?
And what was the year?
But it's in between the end of World War II and this court case, so 1948 and 1967.
Can I hear the options again?
Yep. A, 3, B, 14, C, 25, or D, 10.
I'm gonna guess 14.
All right.
I'm going to guess 14 too.
You're both correct.
Yay!
I'm so proud of you. I also love this solidarity that I'm seeing between the two of you. So those 14 states were Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Indiana, Maryland, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. It felt very weird to have just one of those in between North and South Dakota. So, following on from that, in which state did the first court case to strike down anti-miscegenation laws occur? So, this is the first time that it's because of a court case that they get rid of it, basically. A, California in 1948. B, Idaho in 1935. C, Maryland in 1960, or D, Wyoming in 1955.
I'm going to go with California.
I'm also gonna go with California.
You are both correct. It
Yay.
is the case Perez v. Sharp, which happened in California in 1948.
I had to read that one, so.
I was gonna ask if you know that one.
That would have been really embarrassing if I got that wrong.
Well, kind of going back to the beginning then, which was the first state or colony that became a state to pass a law forbidding marriage between people of different races? Was it A, Maryland, B, North Carolina, C, Pennsylvania, or D, Virginia?
I'm gonna guess Maryland.
Yeah, I'll go with my home state too and go with Maryland.
You're both wrong, but you're very close. So both Virginia and Maryland actually already had laws that prohibited marriage between a free white person and a slave or an indentured servant. But in 1691, Virginia was the first English colony to pass a law prohibiting interracial marriage. But Maryland followed in 1692, the following year. So you guys were very close and definitely on the right track. All right, this is going to get fun. This is where our formatting changes a bit, but this is our last question. So you guys are almost done. You're tied. I'm very proud of you both. All right, so in 1967, when Loving v. Virginia went to the Supreme Court, there were 16 states that still had anti-miscegenation laws on the books. Obviously, you should know what one of the 16 was. Can you name it?
Virginia.
Oh, Virginia.
Nice. Yep, perfect. Okay, so now what I'm going to ask you to do is to name the other 15. What I'm going to do is have you guys...
Okay.
Hold on. We're going to go back and forth between the two of you and see just how many we can get.
Ooh,
If you think about some of the ones that have come up thus far, if you think about the region of the United States that a lot of these states are going to be in, that should help you. A lot of them are clustered
Okay.
together.
We'll try.
So, we're going to get there in the end. Honestly, most of them are very obvious. There's only a couple that threw me. So, Maggie, do you want to guess one of the other 15?
Arkansas.
Correct. Lexi.
Georgia.
Correct. Maggie.
Delaware.
Correct. Oh my god, I'm impressed. Alexis.
Kentucky.
Yes. Very good. Very good. See, you guys are doing better than you thought you were going to be, right?
Yeah.
Maggie.
Florida.
Correct.
West Virginia.
Correct.
Louisiana.
Correct.
How many have we
I
listed
told
so
you.
far?
I told you. You just go through the South.
Basically.
Let's see. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What is that? 6 or 7 that we've named? I think.
I think 6.
Yeah.
South Carolina.
Correct.
North Carolina.
Also correct.
Maggie already said Delaware.
Yep.
Yes.
Now it's getting harder.
My hint is stay south, but go west.
Western South. Okay. Alabama.
Yes.
Have we said Kentucky?
Yes, I said Kentucky.
Yes.
Okay, Oklahoma.
Correct.
Kansas.
Kansas is not one of them.
Oh no.
Oh no.
I'm gonna give you another try.
Oh, okay. Not Wisconsin. We've established Wisconsin.
Yep.
Ooh, can I give Alexis help?
Please.
What's that one big state? It's in the South, in the middle of the country.
Boom! That's the one that I truly was like waiting for you to pick. So well done.
I honestly am kind of kicking myself that I needed help to think of Texas.
All right, I think there's 2 left.
Have we done the 2 MISS states?
Nope. You have not done those. It would be smart to do those.
Mississippi.
Woohoo!
And Missouri.
Nice. So I think that's it. It's Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee. Oh, did one of you say Tennessee?
Yes.
Okay. Texas, Virginia, and West Virginia.
Hey, Nicole.
Yes.
You're the only 10 I see.
Oh my god. So you guys did so well. You got there. It sounds really intimidating, but then you like think about where this really affected by 1967 and
seriously,
there they are. So I'm so proud of you. You guys actually managed to tie, it looks like. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Solidarity.
So well done to both of you. Well done to the readers who followed along at home. Whether you got all of those or none of those, I'm still proud of you. I really should be a teacher.
You should.
So great. And I hope that was a fun way for that information to be delivered rather than me just rattling it off. So do let us know what you thought of the quiz format.
Yes. Do you like it? Did you hate it? Would you like to see us do it more often? Would you like us to post about it on Twitter and let you give your answers before we take the quiz?
Can I just say, like, as someone who listens to podcasts, this is my first podcast appearance, but as someone who listens to podcasts, I do love a good game where I can play along.
Oh,
I can't speak for all podcast listeners, but I love a good game where I can play along.
I like to make sure that we have something fun in these episodes, whether that's just like me and Maggie going on about how Adam Driver would be a great Mr. Rochester, or a quiz, or we've got something excited planned for a future episode that has to do with connecting actors to each other. But I think it's nice to break up some of the history lessons with some fun. Not that history isn't fun, because it is. That's why we're here.
I was just going to say, you really should be a history teacher, Nicole.
You really should.
Think it's not too late to follow my calling, maybe.
Yes. Which perfectly segues us into our digital field trip.
Woohoo!
Our exhibit of the month/episode, since we're all trapped at home, we are probably going to highlight another one in our next episode as well. But this episode, we are highlighting IndiVisible, African Native American Lives in the Americas, which is an exhibit at the National Museum of the American Indian, which Nicole actually found for this episode where she was doing some research. So Nicole, do you want to tell us a little bit about the exhibit?
Yeah, so this exhibit was in DC at, one of the Smithsonian museums, the National Museum of the American Indian, as Maggie said, and it ran way back in February to October of 2012, but they actually did put it online. So that's really great because you can go and look at it, and we'll have the link in the show notes, or you can just Google the name and it will definitely come up. But it seemed like a perfect fit since Mildred Loving was said to identify as both American Indian and African American. And the exhibit includes information about kind of the dynamics of race and community and culture. It has a lot of great photographs in it, both of people and of some artifacts. And it was organized by the National Museum of the American Indian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. So like I said, you can go and check it out, but I just thought that it was a really cool thing that I honestly, like, personally don't know much about at all, and something that tied in really well if you have watched Loving like we have and then listened to this to go and learn more about, I think, a minority that's much less thought about.
Yeah. And I actually think that I might have actually seen this exhibit
Oh, I love that.
in the person, because I definitely went to that museum in 2012. I mean, I've gone to all the Smithsonian so many times and seen so many exhibits, but this one really did ring a bell when you texted me about it. So definitely something, you know, to spend an afternoon exploring an exhibit online and feeling like you're at a Smithsonian museum in the comfort of your pajamas.
And the Smithsonian website has so many different exhibits on it. I kept getting sidetracked while I was looking for a good one to include for this episode because there's just so much content on there. And, you know, Maggie's very lucky because she lives near DC, so she can go. But I was actually hoping to plan a trip to DC to go to some museums and historic sites this year, and I don't know that will be happening. But once we're out of quarantine, I definitely will be back to museums in person. But it's nice to have something to, you know, kind of, I don't think you can replicate the experience, but you can at least get close to it while we are stuck at home.
So Alexis, did you enjoy yourself?
I did. I really did. I got a little nervous at parts, but on whole, I did enjoy myself.
I know I've really put you on the spot, like, and I put Maggie on the spot with the quiz for the first time, but I think you both handled yourselves very well.
Thank you.
You did.
Thank you.
You did well, and you knew more than, like, I would have been able to guess had I not been the one with the answer key. So, well, thank you to all of our listeners for listening to our third episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. And a huge thank you, of course, to our special guest, Alexis, for joining us and giving us some legal expertise. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you on Twitter?
Sure. My social media handle on both Twitter and Instagram is at Alexis Willie, WILLI_, because my name is very generic, and so Alexis Williams is already taken.
We would love to hear from you on social media, and we really want to hear what you thought of Loving.
So you can find us on social media at HGATM Podcast. That's History Girls at the Movies Podcast. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, you can find Maggie at Maggie of the Town, and Nicole, that's me, at Nicole Ackman 16.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or over on the Earglue Media website. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave us a rating over on Apple Podcast or on Podchaser if you are listening on an Android device. Every other episode, we will be reading your reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured. You can also hit us up on Twitter. We also sometimes read Twitter tweets.
And we'll be back soon with another exciting episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. But until then, stay safe and healthy.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies,
History Girls at the Movies.